Hello, boys! I'm back! Independence Day Resurgence is the sequel to the original Independence Day, which came out in 1996, and it stars Jeff Goldblum. That's a terrible reference. In this movie, it's been about 20 years since Independence Day happened, and it's sort of been honoured because people died during the first movie. Like, lives were lost, people sacrificed their lives to save their world, and yet there's more world peace. A lot of the humans are now getting along much better, and human has evolved and created really great futuristic technology, and we've basically gotten smarter and stronger. And so now we have more high-tech weapons, basically. It's more futuristic. And now it's officially Independence Day in 2016, it's the 4th of July, and everyone is celebrating until they discover, there is another alien mothership headed straight for Earth, but this time, it's bigger. I really don't know what to expect out of this movie going in, because I thought it could be a fun movie, but at the same time, it could end up a disaster. So I was a bit concerned. I didn't know whether or not this movie was going to be good. So, is this movie good? The first thing I do have to say is that this is definitely an unnecessary sequel. And there really isn't anything about the story to justify its existence. I think it really only exists just to make money since it has the Independence Day title in it. And it will make money. I know it will. Because it's called Independence Day. But it doesn't matter whether or not it should exist, because it still exists. I just got back from seeing it, so I'm gonna talk about it. So, is this movie good? That's complicated. I can't say it's a bad movie, but I can't say it's a great movie. But I can't say it's mediocre either. It's a very complicated opinion. The best way I can describe this movie for you guys is that I think it was a fun, entertaining movie with a lot of flaws. For starters, there is a lot of destruction in this movie, and I mean a lot of destruction. I mean, millions and millions of people must have died during the movie, because there's a lot of destruction in this. One thing I was always curious about going into this movie is, are they going to blow up the White House again? And if you really want to find out, you're gonna have to watch the movie itself. I'm not gonna say whether or not they do. I thought that Independence Day was a fun movie. I thought it was a fun, enjoyable, good action film. I feel like that it was a great action film of the 90s. Wasn't 1996's best action film in my opinion though. I think that would have to go to Mission Impossible because I really enjoyed this movie. In fact, I might watch this movie again sometime. It's actually really good. This movie definitely has a lot of references to it, and it's definitely similar to the first movie. What I mean by this is that it has quite a lot of references to the first movie, like everything that happened was canon, and there are similar beats in the story that's similar to the first movie. However, there are definitely some changes, and the fact that there's a lot more futuristic technology, like the way how the aliens were fought and everything that happened in the original film was based off the 1990s. However, here it's a lot more futuristic. And so since we have futuristic technology, it really felt like a much different movie. But at the same time, they did have story elements that were similar to the first movie. But right off the bat, I'm going to say that it doesn't matter what this movie does, there will be some people who flat out hate this movie. And I'm not going to blame you guys. One thing I do like about the story though is that the stakes are a lot higher than the first one. Which is funny because in the first movie, the stakes were the entire planet. And while the amount of stakes is the exact same for this one, however, it feels like the stakes are higher. One thing I really liked about this movie is that it felt like that this was a much more difficult task. Defeating the aliens felt like a much more difficult task than the first one. The first one, there were some difficulties and there were some problems and some people got killed during the first one. However, it felt like that for the most part, everyone sort of felt like they were rather at least somewhat on top of things. In this one, there's a lot of vulnerability in our main characters. And since it's been 20 years since the events of the 1996 Independence Day, and it's not just been 20 years since the release of the film, that's how far away the events of the first movie. Like, this movie takes place 20 years after the first movie ended. And so while humans have evolved, so have the aliens. They have gotten smarter, and they have experienced this stuff before. Like, they know what happened in the first movie, so they're smarter, and they're stronger. The poster even said something along the lines of, we had 20 years to prepare. So did they. And that's something I really like, because since the aliens have gotten smarter and stronger, at one point I was thinking, seriously, how are you going to defeat these guys? It's like you're fighting the T-1000. Whenever it looks like the humans have the upper hand, the aliens take over and bring them down again. The humans may be making some progress, it looks like the humans are finally going to make it, but then boom, the aliens have the upper hand. Which allowed for a really great sense of vulnerability in the human race. Notice how I said human race instead of main protagonists. This is one issue I had with the movie. The characters in this movie are not very memorable. I don't even remember any of the characters' names. And here's one of my biggest problems with the movie. There isn't a clear protagonist, which is something that's really important. Whenever you're watching a movie, you always need one specific person to root for. You can have a team aspect if you like, but you need sort of like a leader, like a main protagonist. Someone who you really can root for when they're in peril. This is something I really love about the Mission Impossible movies. Yes, Tom Cruise is with an entire group / team, especially in the last two, and it felt like a team effort, and they really emphasized on the teamwork. However, they still had one person, Ethan Hunt, who was running the show. And the reason why they did that is because when Ethan Hunt was in peril, you really felt for him and you feared for Ethan's survival, which is one of the many reasons why the Mission Impossible movies are so great. The characters are pretty bland in this movie, and I don't really care about them until the very end of the movie. I didn't even get to know any of the characters' names. I just thought of bearded person or old man. That is actually how I was able to differentiate different people and characters throughout the film. I didn't get to know any of the characters' names, but I see effort in them. They tried to give them personalities, they tried to give them goals, they tried to give them backstories, they tried to make them sympathetic. I think they even tried to give them some character arcs. They tried. I just don't think they succeeded, because I just felt like I couldn't latch onto these characters until the climax of the film. It's great to see Jeff Goldblum back in this movie, but I honestly didn't know he was in this movie until I saw his name during the end credits. I saw his name pop up on the screen and I went, oh, Jeff Goldblum is in this movie. I thought he wasn't. Will Smith definitely doesn't return in this movie, but Jeff Goldblum, he makes it back. There are definitely characters that are likable, and I kind of remember the appearance of certain characters. I just don't latch onto them. They're not really that interesting. One thing I do like about the movie though is that, like I said, the stakes did get really high. And I'll get into why I appreciate that about the film in a bit. But overall, I think the characters needed a lot of work. I just couldn't latch onto them until the very end of the movie. Let's talk about something that's been on my mind throughout the entire movie. Like, throughout the entire movie, this is something that's been buzzing around my head. The CGI. There is way too much of it used in this movie. I'm not dissing CGI in the first place. I think CGI does have its place in movies, and I'm not just saying that CGI flat out sucks like a lot of people do. When the first movie came out, CGI was just this brand new thing. Like, just a year before the Independence Day was the original Toy Story. And that was the only fully animated CG movie out. And so since it was such a new thing, it wasn't overly used in the first movie. They used a really good blend of both CGI and practical effects. And since they blend so well in the original film, I could never tell the difference between what was real and what was CG. I always thought that it looked real, and it always felt like it was in front of the camera, and it always felt like it was really there. All those shots when the camera ship is flying over the city, all that stuff looked real. It felt like the ship was actually there in the original movie, because it wasn't overly using on CGI. However, here, it's a CGI fest. Don't get me wrong, the CGI in this movie is good. Really good. It feels realistic, and it feels like that everything that happens in this movie, if it was to happen in real life, that's how it would look. Like, it's really good CGI. My only real problem with it is that it's just so obvious. The scene when the mothership finally lands on Earth, which is probably my favourite scene in the entire movie, by the way, there is a lot of destruction. And when everything is being destroyed and burned and everything and all that stuff, I always felt like I was looking at CGI. Whenever we're looking at the aliens themselves, again, I felt like I was looking at CGI. Again, I'm not calling the CGI flat out bad. It's actually really good CGI. it's just distractingly noticeable. Like, you can tell it's CGI. I can see why there is CGI in this movie, because there are some really great visual things. Like, when the action's happening, some of the stuff that they managed to accomplish in this movie visually would be impossible without CGI. However, it just feels like it's really overly used, and it feels like I'm watching a movie instead of actually being in that situation. Until the climax, that is, and I'll get more into that in a bit. Also, quite a lot of the action sequences, except for 2, were quite bland. There were 1 or 2 exciting ones, like when the ship is coming over a moon and a couple characters just happen to be on the moon, and there's a little cool sequence there that was kind of bland and not very memorable, and I have a feeling I'm going to forget the sequence in 1 or 2 days. There's another one when the ship is like in the sky, and there are a whole bunch of ships just flying around in the blue sky, like alien ships and good and bad ships, and there are lasers flying everywhere, and I actually just felt like picking up an Xbox 360 controller and playing it, because it felt like a video game. I felt like I was watching the video game. I really just felt like picking up an Xbox 360 controller and felt like I was just playing it. I'm just happy to say that not every single action scene felt like a video game. In fact, it was just 1. Some were bland, some felt like a video game, and then there were some that I really enjoyed. My favourite scene in the movie is the entire sequence where the alien mothership finally lands on Earth. Yes, there's a lot of destruction and a lot of CGI in it, however, it was done in a memorable way. And then there's the climax. Whew! The climax. Let me just say that never before have I ever had an adrenaline rush while watching a movie that's as big as the adrenaline rush I had when watching the climax to Independence Day Resurgence. I have definitely had adrenaline rushes while watching action films before, but none of them quite to the extent as what I had in this one. I'm not going to spoil what it is, however, I felt intense. It's finally when I felt like I was caring about the characters. And I think one of the main reasons is just simply because since the stakes were so high, there was a real sense of fear and danger. And I always felt like there was a really high chance that these humans may not win. And with the help of the really good looking CGI, yes, it's obviously CGI, but it's really good CGI. And with the help of the great CGI, the amazing sound design, as well as the fantastic score, as well as the great high stakes, I really felt a sense of danger. I got so invested that I even felt like jumping on my seat going, "Yeah! Get those guys!" I was shocked by how invested I got into the climax in the movie. The climax felt like I was actually there and I was really involved in the battle, and it felt like I was helping the human race save the world. I felt like I was involved in the climax. Which is why I have to say that if you plan on seeing this movie, watch it on the big screen. If you plan on seeing this movie, go and see it in the cinemas. This movie has pacing issues. The movie moved very slowly in the beginning. The characters were pretty bland, pretty dull, and there was an extreme use of CGI. However, was I entertained by this movie? Absolutely. This movie was tons of fun, especially in 2 certain scenes. The mothership landing on the Earth scene and the climax alone made me glad I saw this movie in theaters. It's just not a great movie because there are so many flaws with it. And one thing I also have to bring up is the ending. This is not a spoiler. It's okay, everyone. I'm not going to spoil anything. But one thing I will just say is that the ending screams Independence Day 3. We're going to get another one. Let's just hope we don't have to wait 20 years for the next one, because unlike the first one, this one actually does end off at a cliffhanger. But overall, this movie is very flawed. I can only see myself watching it once or twice again, but overall, I enjoyed this movie. It was a great cinema-going experience, but it's one of those movies where the best way to experience it is in the cinemas. Like, either watch it in the theater, or don't watch it at all. I'm going to give Independence Day Resurgence a B. It's a good movie and I was really entertained by it, but it definitely has some really serious problems, and I can expect this movie to get quite a bit of hate. So Independence Day Resurgence, I'm really curious on hearing your thoughts on it. Are you planning on seeing it? Have you seen it? And if you have, what do you think of it? Let me know down below. I personally enjoyed it, however, it definitely has flaws, but it's still a pretty entertaining movie. Hasta la vista, baby.